Launceston was suddenly in an uproar. No one had ever imagined that a yabby farm on the outskirts of the city could become the center of a news story that would shake the entire country. That morning, the crisp, cool air typical of northern Tasmania still enveloped the suburbs of Mowbray. Dew clung to the gum leaves. The sound of kookaburras was rowdy, and the streets were still empty as most residents were just getting ready to head to work. But that tranquility was shattered when a putrid stench, stinging the nostrils, drifted from the direction of the yabby farm owned by a local businesswoman named Sharon Price. That farm had long been the pride of the area. Many people admired Sharon's success, managing to turn a marshy patch of land into a source of income. Every harvest, small trucks would drive in and out, carrying fresh yabbies which were then marketed to restaurants and the local fish markets. Sharon herself was known to be friendly. She often handed out Woolies vouchers to locals around Christmas. More than a few called her a caring and generous soul. But that morning, all those good opinions seemed to crumble in an instant. An Uber Eats driver named Carl Peterson was the first witness to sense something was wrong. As he rode his scooter past the farm, a rancid smell hit him, making him cough. At first, he thought it was just the smell of stagnant mud, but the closer he got, the sharper the aroma became, until it made his stomach churn. Curiosity forced him to stop. With cautious steps, he approached the edge of the main dam, its water looking murkier than usual. Kyle saw something floating, at first glance like a bundle of old rags. He tried to hold his breath while sharpening his gaze. His heart pounded when the bundle moved slowly, dragged by the dam's circulation pump. Trembling, he grabbed a long star picket lying beside a small tin shed and tried to hook the bundle. When he managed to pull it to the edge, his body froze. It wasn't just cloth, but a man's shirt, still attached to a human body. The body was bloated, its skin a pale, grayish color, and the face was almost unrecognizable. Kyle fell backwards, his voice choking. Then he screamed at the top of his lungs, calling for help. People who heard him came running. Within minutes, a dozen residents were standing at the edge of the dam. They were horrified by the unbelievable sight. One old bloke sat down weakly. A woman covered her face, crying in fear. As the residents tried to pull the body out, they found there were more. One by one, men's bodies emerged from the mud. Some were still bound, some wore torn clothing, and some were just skeletons. The stench intensified, making several people vomit on the spot. The atmosphere turned to panic. Hysterical screams mixed with sobs. The news spread quickly. In a short time, the road to the farm was filled with curious onlookers. Some tried to block small children from getting closer. Others prayed loudly, asking for God's protection. Most residents believed this was not normal. Whispers suggested that maybe Sharon Price was involved in dark dealings. Some said this was a human sacrifice to grow her business. But others were puzzled, because all this time, Sharon was known as a generous person and a regular churchgoer. Darren Dazza Williams, a local MP, who lived not far from the location, arrived in a hurry. He tried to calm the terrified residents. In a loud voice he said, "Let's not speculate, everyone." However, his own face was pale. His eyes wavered as he witnessed the bodies being lifted from the dam. The rancid smell hung in the air, making it difficult for anyone to think clearly. Before long, police sirens were heard in the distance. Patrol cars stopped in front of the farm. Police tape was immediately put up, encircling the dam. Officers forbade residents from approaching. Media cameras also began to arrive, recording every corner and every anxious face. Big headlines spread across television and online media: 49 male bodies found in Mowbray Yabby Dam. Kyle, still in shock, sat on the roadside. His body trembled. The image of the first body he pulled from the dam kept flashing in his eyes. Residents tried to calm him, but he could only whisper hoarsely, "That wasn't just dead fish. That was people." His voice sounded like both a prayer and a deep, profound fear. That day, Launceston truly changed. The city, usually known for its friendliness and cool air, was now filled with dread. Parents began locking their doors earlier. Teenagers were forbidden from going out at night. The Yabby farm, once considered a symbol of hard work, had become a mass grave. And the name Sharon Price, once celebrated, was now a massive question mark. Who was this woman, really? How could such a horrifying secret be hidden behind her smile? That question hung in the air, waiting for an answer that would pull back the dark veil behind the charm of Launceston. Launceston always had a friendly face. Every morning, the sun rose over the hills, casting a warm light onto the rooftops and highways. The sound of delivery vans mingled with the rumble of utes starting up for the day. In the Mowbray area, life seemed to move slowly. Mums were busy hanging out the washing. Kids walked to school, mucking about. And dads left for work on simple motorbikes or in old Holdens. Although the city was known to be busy, certain corners still held that classic Tassie community feel. Near the wide, marshy river flats stood Sharon Price's Yabby farm. The dams were built neatly, surrounded by wire fencing, and equipped with simple water channels. Locals often praised how persistent Sharon had been, building the business from scratch. She used to be just a widow selling veg at the weekend market. Now she was a reasonably successful aquaculture entrepreneur. Many local young blokes got jobs on her farm. They helped spread the feed, clean the sludge, or transport the harvest to the markets. Sharon often said that yabbies were patient creatures. They could live in murky water, surviving even in a dirty environment. Those words were seen as wise advice. Many took that phrase as a motto for life. No one suspected that behind the dam full of yabbies, something far darker was hidden. The days went on as usual. People still gathered at the local bakery near the main road. Light banter about the price of petrol, about the footy, or about plans for the new highway bypass near Mowbray. Occasionally, Sharon's name was mentioned with admiration. Residents felt lucky to have such a generous neighbour, as she often donated to church fundraisers, or helped kids who were struggling with school fees. But that calm began to be disturbed when a few people smelled a strange odour coming from the direction of the Yabby Dam. At first, they thought it was just the smell of mud carried on the wind. The dry season often made the dam water more pungent. But this smell was different. Sharper, more piercing, making your head spin. A young man named Liam, who often helped out with the feeding, was puzzled. Usually, the yabbies just had a normal, slightly fishy smell, but lately, the aroma was like a carcass. One morning, he asked Sharon about it. With a faint smile, Sharon replied that it was normal. She said, "When we get a long dry spell, the smell of the dams is always stronger. Once the rains come, it'll all go away." Liam nodded. Although his heart was uneasy, he felt something was being hidden. At the bakery, several residents complained about the same thing. One woman said, "I often get dizzy every time the wind blows from the direction of the farm." A father recounted how his son refused to walk past the road near the dam anymore because he was scared of the smell. Despite this, every time there was a complaint, there was always someone who defended her. Some said it was just their imagination. Others said, "It's a yabby farm, what do you expect? Of course it smells." The conversation never went any further. People chose to stay quiet. After all, Sharon had helped a lot of people. No one dared to accuse her of anything bad. It was easier to pretend nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, city life continued. In the center of Launceston, people were busy at work. The malls were full of shoppers, tourists flocked to Cataract Gorge, and small cafes were packed with young people. In contrast to all that liveliness, in the quiet corner of Mowbray, the stench grew stronger. At night, the wind carried the strange aroma, waking people from their sleep. Liam, whose house wasn't far from the dam, often felt nauseous. He tried covering his nose with his pillow, but it didn't help much. From his window, he could see the dam shrouded in a thin mist. The floodlight that was usually on seemed dim. The sound of crickets mixed with the whispering wind, but that night felt quieter than usual. He held his breath. Suspicion grew stronger, but no one could do much. Everyone was still waiting. The smell was just the first sign of a huge secret that was about to be exposed. A secret that would change the residents' view of Sharon Price, of their own city, and of the true meaning of truth. Launceston during the day was always busy. The roads were packed with vehicles, horns blared, and food vans lined the footpaths. But in the Mowbray area, underneath the hustle and bustle, a sense of unease began to creep into the hearts of the residents. The foul smell from Sharon Price's Yabby Dam wasn't going away. A local greengrocer named Mrs. Marnie often complained. She said every time she drove past the road near the farm, her head spun and her throat felt sore. She told her neighbor that the smell was like off meat left out for days. The old blokes who often hung around the local pub talked about the same thing. They compared the smell to a dead possum submerged in water. Liam, the young man who often helped feed the yabbies, grew more anxious. He noticed the yabbies, usually lively, now seemed lazy to come to the surface. When the pellets were scattered, only a few fought over them. The dam water looked thicker. Bubbles appeared, then burst with a small pop, spreading an even more pungent aroma. Liam tried to work up the courage to ask Sharon again. The answer he received was the same as before. A faint smile, calming words, and a simple explanation about the dry season. However, her gaze felt heavy, as if she was hiding something. Residents began to gossip about what was behind the strange smell. Some whispered that maybe there was a large dead animal in the dam, like a cow. Others dared to mention the word bikies. Some believed that a widow who suddenly became rich must have a secret. They said the dam wasn't just a farm, it was a place to hide something. Even so, not everyone agreed with the gossip. Some of the older locals defended Sharon. They said it wasn't right to accuse someone who had helped so much. Didn't she often donate during church events? Didn't she help pay for kids' schooling? Didn't she give jobs to the unemployed young blokes? Accusations without proof would only ruin her good name. That's what they said. Mayor Hugh Sullivan, a councillor respected by the residents, even spoke in front of a crowd. He said, "Don't be so quick to believe whispers." He was sure Sharon was a good person. He asked the residents to stop spreading rumors that weren't necessarily true. That speech made some residents fall silent. They didn't dare oppose the voice of a leader. But in their hearts, the anxiety continued to grow. Liam felt trapped. On one hand, he respected Sharon as his employer. On the other hand, his gut told him, something is wrong. At night, he often woke up because of the sharp smell. The wind carried the putrid aroma into his room. He stared at the dark sky, hearing a dog barking in the distance. Fear mixed with curiosity. The chat at the pub got louder. One middle-aged man said his son refused to go near the dam road anymore. The kid was terrified. He said he felt like someone was watching him from behind the mist. A woman added that she had seen trucks stop near the farm several times late at night. The truck would come quietly and then leave before dawn. But when asked further, she chose to stay silent, afraid of being seen as a gossip. The news spread quickly. Residents talked about it at the market, at the school, even at the pub after work. But every time the conversation started to heat up, there was always a voice that calmed things down. "Don't jump to conclusions," it would say. "We don't know for sure that what we are smelling is a body. It could just be rubbish. It could just be the mud." The conversation would stop there. As if there was an invisible wall making everyone reluctant to step further. Day after day passed. But the smell only got stronger. For Liam, it felt like a sign. He didn't know what it was a sign of, but his gut feeling said something big was waiting to be revealed. That night he sat on his front porch, looking towards the dam, which was faintly visible in the distance. The wind carried the foul aroma past his nose. In his heart, he whispered, "What is really hidden in that murky water?" That night, Launceston was hit by light rain. The streets in the Mowbray area looked slick. Street lights reflected off the puddles. Liam sat on his porch, trying to calm his nerves. However, the putrid smell from the dam direction was getting stronger, so piercing it made him nauseous. He covered his nose with his t-shirt, but the unpleasant feeling still crept into his chest. For the past few weeks, he felt his life had changed. His sleep was no longer sound. Every time he closed his eyes, he seemed to see dark shadows floating on the surface of the murky water. His mother had advised him not to think about strange things. "Don't get involved in gossip," she said. But Liam knew he couldn't ignore his gut feeling. Something was hidden in that dam. The next morning, he left earlier for the farm. The air was still cold, a thin mist covered the paddocks, and the sound of roosters crowed back and forth. In his hand was a sack of yabby pellets. His steps felt heavy, not because of the load, but because of the fear that continued to haunt him. When he arrived at the edge of the dam, he stood for a moment. The water, usually rippling with fish fighting for food, now looked calm, almost without a ripple. Hesitantly, he scattered a handful of pellets. Only a few yabbies surfaced. Their movements were slow, not like usual. Liam frowned. His heart felt even more uneasy. He turned towards the small tin shed where Sharon usually Saturday. But that morning, the shed was empty. The door of the house next to the dam was also tightly closed. He sat on the edge of the dam, staring at the murky, brownish water surface. Small bubbles appeared, then burst, spreading a sharper aroma. Liam spontaneously covered his nose. His curiosity grew. He picked up the long star picket that was usually used to stir the feed. Carefully, he poked the bottom of the dam. The picket felt like it hit something solid. Slowly, he lifted it again. A dark cloth was stuck to the end of the picket, wet, smelly, and heavy. Liam thought it was just rubbish. But when he pulled harder, the cloth was connected to something large. Suddenly, a human arm appeared, bluish, swollen, and covered in mud. Liam was shocked beyond belief, his body shaking violently. He fell backward. His eyes widened, staring at the figure emerging from the water. His voice choked, then broke into a panicked scream. "There's a body. There's a body in the dam." He ran as fast as he could towards the main road. He was out of breath, his legs felt wobbly, but his mouth kept screaming. Residents who heard him immediately rushed out of their houses. They followed Liam back to the dam. When they arrived, several people tried to pull on the cloth. With great difficulty, the body of an adult man was successfully lifted. His face was hard to recognize, his clothes were torn, his skin a pale greenish color. The stench was so overwhelming that some residents vomited on the spot. A woman shrieked hysterically. An old man fell to his knees, clutching his chest. The atmosphere turned chaotic. Children were forbidden from getting close. Residents crowded around. Some cried, some prayed. Someone said, "It's just one body." But as they tried to drain the dam water with a simple pump, a far more horrifying reality was revealed. At the bottom of the dam, shadows of other bodies were visible, piled up, mixed with the mud. A young man shouted in fear. "Oh God, it's not one, there are heaps of them." The residents panicked even more. They pushed forward, wanting to see, but also afraid to get closer. Wild talk began to spread. Some were convinced it was for dodgy business. Others suspected a serial killer. Sharon Price's name began to be mentioned in suspicious tones. How could a widow hide a secret this big? Liam stood in the middle of the crowd. His body was still shaking. He felt guilty and scared at the same time. Guilty because all this time he had just kept quiet, not daring to speak up about the foul smell he kept noticing. Scared because he knew this discovery would change everything. The dam that was once a source of livelihood had now become a silent witness to a horrifying crime. That day, Mowbray, usually quiet, suddenly became the center of attention. Police sirens began to be heard in the distance. Journalists arrived. Cameras pointed at the dam. The faces of the residents were clearly displayed. And Liam, the simple young man who just intended to feed the yabbies, was now the main witness who first discovered the dark secret. He knew his life would never be the same again. The crowd of residents around the dam grew larger. The dirt track connecting the housing estate to the farm was packed with curious people. Screams, sobs, and prayers mixed into one. Some residents were still trying to drain the dam water with whatever tools they had. But the deeper they worked, the more bodies became visible. The stench pierced their noses, making many unable to hold back their nausea. In the midst of the panic, a dark sedan stopped on the roadside. From inside stepped a man in a neat white shirt. His face was calm, although a shadow of unease was clearly visible. It was Mayor Hugh Sullivan, who lived in the area. The residents immediately moved aside to let him through. He was a well-known figure. He often attended community events, helped with church funding, supported local charities, and even joined in working bees when floods hit. For many, he was a leader who cared. Hugh stepped to the front of the crowd. In a loud voice, he asked the residents to calm down. He said everyone should be patient and leave this matter to the authorities. "Let's not jump to conclusions," he said. "The foul smell we've been noticing has indeed been mysterious, but we mustn't be reckless." His words sounded firm, providing a little calm to the hysterical people. Several residents nodded, although their hearts were still filled with fear. After all, the voice of a city official carried great weight. A middle-aged man whispered to his neighbor, "If the mayor is speaking, maybe it's true we shouldn't be quick to blame." A crying woman began to quiet down, trying to catch her breath. Among the crowd, Liam stood trembling. His eyes were still fixed on the dam. He couldn't just calm down. The image of the human arm he first pulled from the mud was still clear in his mind. But as he watched Hugh shake hands with the residents one by one, he felt something strange. The smile that was usually warm now looked stiff. His gaze wavered as if hiding something. Sharon Price finally came out of her house. She wore a simple scarf. Her face was pale. In a hoarse voice, she said she knew nothing. She said she was just a small business owner trying to feed her family. The residents looked at her, confused. It was hard to believe a woman, who had always seemed so gentle, could hide such a massive secret. However, Hugh's earlier words made some people choose to remain silent. A young man shouted, accusing Sharon of being responsible for the bodies. But that shout was quickly reprimanded by some of the elders. "Don't talk rubbish," they said. "We don't know the truth." It's possible someone else deliberately dumped the bodies in the dam, without the owner's knowledge. That statement made the conversation stop there. No one dared to continue. Hugh then spoke to the police who had just arrived. He requested that the investigation be conducted carefully, so as not to tarnish the reputation of the local residents. His face looked serious, as if he genuinely wanted to protect the city's peace. Media cameras recorded him, capturing his image as a leader present among the people during a crisis. However, behind all that, there were signs that made some people uneasy. Several times, Hugh's gaze met Sharon's eyes. There was a faint signal that was hard to understand. As if the two shared a secret that couldn't be spoken in public. Liam, watching from a distance, felt the hairs on his neck stand up. He didn't know what that look meant, but his heart said that the truth was not as simple as it seemed. The day began to turn to evening. The police put up more yellow tape, forbidding anyone from approaching the dam. The bodies that had been retrieved were put into body bags. Ambulances went back and forth, taking the victims to the hospital for identification. Residents stood on the roadside. Some were still praying, some just stood silently with grim faces. Hugh patted Liam's shoulder, telling him to stay calm. "You've done a service by finding this," he said, "but don't be afraid, the state will protect you." Liam just nodded weakly. In his heart, that very sentence added to his suspicion. Why was Hugh so quick to reassure him? As if he wanted to suppress something before the truth really came out. That night, the residents returned to their homes with uneasy hearts. The Yabby Dam, that was once a source of pride, had now turned into a cursed place. Sharon's name, once praised, was now replaced by whispers full of suspicion. But behind all the commotion, there was still a large wall that made residents reluctant to speak further. Because a generous woman and a respected city official still stood as protectors. The question was, were these protectors truly sincere, or were they part of the dark secret that was slowly being uncovered? The wail of police sirens grew louder as night fell. The small road leading to the farm was filled with official vehicles. Uniformed police officers got out one by one. Their faces were serious. Their steps were hurried. The yellow tape circled even more tightly around Sharon Price's Yabby Dam. The residents who had been standing close were forced to move back. From behind the makeshift barrier, they could only watch from a distance. Floodlights were set up in several corners. The bright glare made the murky water in the dam clearly visible. Several forensic officers wore special protective suits, masks covering their faces, plastic gloves stuck tightly to their fingers. They descended carefully, lifting body after body from the mud. White body bags lined the roadside. The number grew, making people unable to even count. Residents pushed against the yellow tape. Some covered their mouths, some wept softly. Others just stood frozen with pale faces. The stench spread through the air, mixing with the smell of wet mud and the cigarette smoke of the officers on guard. Liam stood among the crowd. His body was still shaking. His eyes stared blankly at the body bags. The memory of pulling the cloth from the water was still clear in his mind. He felt like screaming, but his voice was stuck, as if his chest was locked by a fear he had never felt before. Sharon Price sat on a plastic chair beside her house. Her face was pale, her gaze empty. Occasionally, she wiped her face with her scarf. A police officer sat beside her, taking notes of every word she said. But her answer was always the same. She knew nothing. She said she was just a dam owner working to feed her family. Nothing more. Mayor Hugh Sullivan approached the officers with a firm tone. He requested that the investigation not cause further unrest. He said the residents were panicked enough. The police had to work quickly and wisely. His words were recorded by the media cameras that continued to film. The image of a caring leader was once again displayed on the screen. But for some who looked closer, his face appeared tense. His eyes were full of anxiety. On the other side, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Marner stood, clutching an old shawl. Her eyes were swollen, her voice hoarse. She whispered that perhaps among the bodies was her son, who had been missing for a year. No one knew where he had gone. Many said he'd gone to the mainland for work. But Mrs. Marner was sure something was wrong. Her sobs broke out, making the people around her feel her pain. The atmosphere grew heavier when an officer shouted out the count of the bodies recovered. 49. The number echoed in the residents' ears. No one could hold back a long breath. 49 men, all dead, unknown to their families. A number too large to be called a coincidence. Journalists were busy capturing every angle. Photos of the police tape, the crying faces of residents, and the rows of body bags immediately spread across national television. Launceston, usually known as a tourist and university city, was now in the spotlight for a horrifying tragedy. The headlines were huge: 49 male bodies found in Yabby Dam. Liam tried to calm himself by sitting under a tree. His breathing was heavy, cold sweat dripped from his temples. Several people approached, patting his shoulder, calling him an important witness. But for Liam, the word witness just made the burden heavier. He was just an ordinary young bloke. He had never imagined his life would be dragged into an event this big. The night grew later. The police were still busy working. The body bags were carried one by one to the ambulances. Blue and red lights spun, cutting through the dark night. The residents slowly returned to their homes, but the fear remained stuck in their chests. They whispered before going to sleep, wondering who could be cruel enough to do this. Inside his small rental unit, Liam sat lost in thought. He couldn't shake the image of the dam. His ears still rang with the sound of people screaming when the first body was lifted. His heart told him that this was just the beginning. The real truth was still buried in the mud, waiting to be dug up. The next morning, the Launceston sky was still grey. The previous night's rain left puddles on the roads. The air felt heavy and damp. But in the small community hall in Mowbray, the atmosphere was very busy. An emergency post was set up, a white tent stood in the middle of the field, and a whiteboard was full of scribbled data. The local police were working with officers from State Command. Every face looked serious. From a grey government car stepped a young man in a neat suit. He was only in his early 30s, but his gaze was sharp and full of determination. He was Detective Adam Burke, a young investigator assigned directly from Taspel headquarters in Hobart. Although he was young, his track record was impressive. He was known to be tenacious, fearless, and often successful in solving complex cases. His presence was met with hopeful looks from the residents. People crowded around the post, looking at Adam, as if he was the one who could provide answers. Mayor Hugh Sullivan was there to greet him, shaking his hand with a warm smile. He said in a steady voice, "Welcome, Detective. The residents are distressed. We trust your arrival will bring clarity." Adam just nodded briefly, his eyes seeming to try and read something behind that friendly face. After a brief coordination, Adam headed to the dam location. He stood at the edge of the police line, staring into the mud that still held a dark shadow. The body bags had indeed been taken away last night, but the residual stench still stung. Adam took a long breath and exhaled slowly. There was a heavy feeling pressing on his chest. A forensic officer approached, giving a report with a serious face. From the initial identification, several victims matched the list of missing persons in Launceston and the surrounding area. Most were young men, manual labourers, or small-time workers. All had disappeared within the last 10 years. Adam listened intently, his heart tightening. That report reminded him of something he had long suppressed. He walked over to one of the body bags that hadn't been taken to the hospital yet, awaiting further identification. For some reason, he felt compelled to look closer. His colleague tried to stop him, but Adam still unzipped it slightly. Instantly, his body stiffened. That pale face, though damaged, still held lines he recognized. Adam froze, his eyes watering. Childhood memories flooded back. That face was his uncle's, a truck driver named Uncle Kevin, who disappeared when Adam was still in primary school. For years, his family could only wonder where he went. Some said he'd moved interstate, some said he'd had an accident. No one knew for sure. Now, his body lay stiffly in front of him. A hoarse sound escaped his mouth, almost like a whisper torn from his chest. "Uncle." His colleagues looked at him, puzzled. One asked with a worried tone, "Detective Burke, do you know this victim?" Adam took a deep breath, trying to control his emotions. "I can't be sure," he replied slowly, "but he looks a lot like my uncle who went missing years ago." The atmosphere was silent for a moment. The other officers looked at each other. Sympathy was clear in their eyes. No one expected the investigator sent to the case would have a personal connection to it. However, Adam quickly composed himself. He zipped the body bag back up and stood tall. His voice trembled but was firm. "Whatever happens, I will remain professional. But starting today, this case isn't just a job. It's personal." That day, Adam worked harder than usual. He checked every old document about missing persons in Tassie. Report after report that was once dismissed, he now read with full attention. Many victims' names turned out to match the identities of the bodies from the dam. Most were simple men who disappeared without a trace. The police back then had assumed they'd run off, moved away, or gotten lost. But Adam was convinced something had been deliberately covered up. That night, when the suburb grew quiet, Adam stood alone by the edge of the dam. A crescent moon hung low. Its light reflected on the murky water. The wind carried the rancid smell, making his eyes water. He stared at the mud that still held many mysteries, then whispered softly, "Uncle Kev, I promise I'll find who did this. I'll make sure they pay." He didn't know that oath would drag him into a network far larger than he imagined. A network involving influential people, perhaps even those he spoke to every day. The following days, the atmosphere in Mowbray was thick with anxiety. Residents chose to stay indoors when night fell. The small streets became quieter than usual. Children were forbidden from playing too far, while parents were always on edge every time they heard an unfamiliar vehicle pass by. At the investigation post, Adam Burke sat at a simple wooden table. His face was serious, staring at a pile of files. He reopened the missing persons reports from the last 10 years. One by one, he marked the victims' names with a red pen. The longer he read, the clearer the pattern became. Almost all the victims were simple men, manual laborers, construction workers, taxi drivers, and even some were street vendors. They all disappeared within a certain radius that was never far from the Mowbray area. Adam stood up and pinned a large map of Launceston to the wall. He drew lines from one point to another according to the last location the victim was seen. Slowly, a red web formed, seeming to show the center of a circle. And in the middle of that circle, Sharon Price's Yabby Dam looked like the final point of a dark journey. A colleague, also an investigator, looked at the map with a frown. He commented in a low voice, "All the victims were last seen at the bus depot, the night markets, or on quiet side streets. The pattern is too neat to be a coincidence." Adam nodded, his eyes narrowing. He felt like he was following a trail that had been intentionally left. As if a hidden hand had been controlling all this for a long time. Liam, the young man who first found the body, often came to the post. Although still traumatized, he wanted to know the progress of the investigation. That night, he worked up the courage to speak. He said that several times before the foul smell appeared, he saw large trucks secretly entering the farm area. The truck was never seen during the day, only arriving in the middle of the night. Adam turned quickly. He asked, "Did you recognize the driver, or the owner of the truck?" Liam shook his head, but he remembered seeing the driver talking to someone who often accompanied Mayor Sullivan at official events. That information made Adam's heart flutter. Hugh Sullivan's name had felt odd to him from the beginning. A figure so respected, always friendly, always present in residents' affairs. But why did his name reappear in small pieces of information like this? Adam knew as an investigator he couldn't jump to conclusions, but his instinct said there was a big secret being hidden. That afternoon, the rain returned. The investigation post felt cold. The wind flapped the plastic sheeting on the side of the tent. Adam sat lost in thought, staring at the map. His hand gripped the photo of his uncle, who was now confirmed to be one of the victims. Tears almost fell, but he held them back. He whispered to himself that he must not falter. The truth had to be revealed, no matter how high the stakes. Meanwhile, residents were still living in fear. The chat at the pub was no longer light-hearted. People talked about who might be the next victim. Some were afraid their husbands or sons would also disappear if they went out at night. Others were convinced that this case involved insiders, because it was impossible for so many victims to vanish without being noticed. But every time big names started to be mentioned, the conversation stopped abruptly. As if there was an invisible wall silencing their courage. Adam wrote notes in his small book. Victim pattern clearly points to Mowbray. Mysterious trucks often enter secretly. Possible involvement of influential people who appear clean. He pieced it all together into a common thread. But he knew the deeper he dug, the greater the risk that lurked. That night, he stood by the edge of the dam again. The water had receded because most of the mud had been drained for the investigation. The foul smell still lingered, though not as sharp as when it was first discovered. A half-moon hung in the sky. Its faint light fell on the water's surface. Adam stared long at the dam, then clenched his fist. He promised himself, whatever happens, I will not back down. The truth must not sink with 49 bodies at the bottom of the dam. The night in Launceston fell quickly. After the afternoon rain, the streets in Mowbray were still wet. Street lights glistened, reflecting light on the asphalt. At the post, Adam sat wearing a simple black jacket. He wasn't wearing a uniform that night, just carrying a small pistol and his notebook. His heart was restless. His gut feeling said, tonight, something is going to happen. Around 11 p.m., the sound of a heavy engine was heard in the distance. Adam immediately turned off the light in the small post he was using as a lookout. Through a gap in the curtain, he saw a grey box truck pass slowly on the small road heading towards an old warehouse near the freight railway line. The truck's lights were deliberately dimmed, almost invisible if not watched closely. Adam started his car engine slowly, following from a safe distance. His breathing was steady, his eyes sharp, looking ahead. The truck continued moving down the quiet road, then stopped near an old building that hadn't been used for a long time. From a distance, Adam saw two men get out of the cabin. They opened the back door of the truck. The sound of metal clanging was heard. But what made Adam's blood run cold was the faint sound that followed. He heard soft, intermittent crying, as if someone was holding their breath in fear. That cry was definitely not the sound of inanimate objects, it was the sound of a human. Adam ducked behind his car, his heart pounding. He wanted to approach immediately, but had to restrain himself. There were more of them, and he didn't have enough backup that night. He could only record with the small camera he always carried. The shadow of a body moving inside the truck was recorded faintly, enough to be proof that there were still living victims. One of the men slammed the back door shut. They then spoke briefly. Their hoarse voices were carried on the night wind. Adam couldn't hear everything, only a few fragmented words. Taken out tonight. Don't get caught. That sentence was enough to make his skin crawl. The truck started moving again. Adam tried to follow, but suddenly a motorbike from the opposite direction sped past. The rider turned briefly, his eyes staring sharply at Adam's car. For a moment, it was silent, then the bike turned around, following him. Adam realized he'd been spotted. He quickly turned off his car lights, pulled over to a small side street, and killed the engine. From the darkness, he saw the motorbike stop not far away. The rider seemed to be talking on the phone. Adam gripped his pistol tightly, his breathing heavy. But he knew tonight was not the right time to fight. If he acted rashly, the living victims in the truck could be lost forever. A few minutes later, the bike left. The truck also disappeared further into the outskirts of the city. Adam could only watch, his jaw clenched. He had failed to follow them to their destination, but one thing was certain. This network was still active, and not all the victims were dead. The next morning, he returned to the post, his face weary. Liam was already waiting anxiously. Adam told him part of what he had seen. Liam was silent, then said in a trembling voice, "So it's true, mate. They are still taking people alive." Adam nodded, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He stressed that this wasn't just a murder case, but a highly organized human trafficking network. The residents who heard the news became even more anxious. The chat at the bakery turned fearful. They imagined that their relatives or neighbors could be the next victims. Some whispered that big people must be involved, because it was impossible for a crime this large to operate for years without being detected. Behind it all, Adam wrote in his book, "Tonight I saw the grey truck. There are living victims inside. They mentioned a plan to move them out tonight. I have to move fast before it's too late." He knew the next step was extremely dangerous, but he also realized that every second meant a life. That day, the air in Launceston felt heavy. The sun was hidden behind grey clouds. The wind blew, carrying the smell of damp earth that hadn't disappeared after the previous night's rain. At the investigation post, Adam sat at a long table full of documents. In front of him was a financial intelligence report he had just received from the central team. The report made his heart beat faster. It recorded a large flow of funds into the accounts of several city officials, including Mayor Hugh Sullivan. The funds came in regularly, every 3 months. The amount was unnatural for a city official's salary. Even more suspicious, the sender of the funds was listed under the name of a businessman named Vince Costa. That name was not unfamiliar to Adam. Vinnie Costa was known as a major businessman who had long been linked to illegal activities in Tassie. Starting from gambling to logistics businesses full of suspicion. Adam closed the report with a trembling hand. All the puzzle pieces were starting to form a clear picture. The mysterious truck carrying victims, the old warehouse used as a transit point, and now the flow of funds to the official's account. All the threads pointed to one name, Hugh Sullivan. But as an investigator, Adam knew he couldn't be reckless. Financial evidence alone was not enough to bring down such a respected official. He needed a confession, a witness, or direct evidence that could link Sullivan to Vinnie Costa's network. That afternoon, Adam decided to meet Sullivan at his office. The office was located in a grand building near the city centre. The walls were full of photos of social activities, from handing out charity hampers to helping build community centres. From the outside, Sullivan's image looked perfect as a caring leader. When Adam entered, Sullivan greeted him with a wide smile. He said in a warm voice, "Detective Burke, I know your job is tough. Maybe this little chat can provide some relief." Adam sat down, accepting a cup of hot tea that was served, but his mind was never at ease. His eyes darted around, looking for something out of place. And sure enough, on Sullivan's desk, he saw an open diary. On one of its pages was written the name V. Coaster with a large figure scribbled next to it. A brief glance, but enough to make Adam's blood run cold. He quickly hid his surprise, pretending to remain calm. He tried to probe with a simple question. "Many residents praise you as a good leader, generous, and always caring. But aren't you worried your name will be tarnished by this Yabby Dam case?" Sullivan laughed lightly, his face still friendly. He replied casually, "Of course I'm worried, but I believe the truth will come out. I have no business with things like that." Adam nodded, though his heart was full of questions. Sullivan's words sounded sweet, but his gaze was sharp, as if testing Adam's courage. He restrained himself from showing the evidence he had. He knew this fight wasn't just about justice, but also about patience. That night, Adam wrote everything in his notebook. Mysterious truck connected to Coaster. Coaster flows large funds to Sullivan's account. Diary on Sullivan's desk has Coaster's name. Everything was becoming clearer, but everything was also becoming more dangerous. Meanwhile, at the Mowbray pub, residents were talking more and more about the case. Some dared to mention Mayor Sullivan's name in a suspicious tone, but were quickly silenced by others. After all, Sullivan had helped many residents. For some, it was impossible for someone so generous to be the mastermind of a horrifying tragedy. But for Adam, the more perfect someone seemed, the more likely it was that they had a dark side to hide. That night, he found it hard to sleep again. The image of his uncle's face continued to haunt him. The faint sound of crying from inside the truck still rang in his ears. And every time Sullivan's name came up, his heart grew hotter. He knew time was running out. If he didn't act soon, other victims could disappear just like that. Adam looked out the window of his small rental. The rain was falling again, tapping on the tin roof, carrying a soft sound that made the night even darker. In his heart, he whispered, "Sullivan, I know you're not just an innocent bystander in this. And I promise I will expose everything, even if it costs me my life." Since the meeting with Mayor Sullivan, Adam's heart grew even more restless. Every step he took felt watched. Every word seemed like it could be a trap. The nights in Launceston, usually lively, now felt like silent corridors full of danger. 2 days after he saw the mysterious truck, the signs of threats began to materialize. First, he found the tire of his official car flat, with a sharp slash mark. At first, he thought it was just a coincidence, maybe a nail on the road. But his gut told him otherwise. The cut was too clean, too deep, as if done deliberately. The next night, when he returned to his simple rental on the outskirts of Mowbray, a brown envelope was lying in front of his door. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was just a crumpled piece of paper with rough writing, "Back off, or your body will join the others in the dam." Adam gripped the paper tightly. His breath quickened, not from fear, but from anger. This threat was clear, not a joke. He knew his enemies were starting to panic. But the threats didn't stop there. One night, as he was driving down a deserted road near the paddocks to check on a resident's report about suspicious noises, the sound of a roaring exhaust approached. Motorbike headlights shone brightly from behind, approaching at high speed. Two men in dark helmets pulled up alongside him. One swung a machete towards Adam. Reflexively, he swerved his car sharply towards the grassy shoulder. The wheels skidded, his car almost rolling, but he managed to avoid the main blow. His heart pounded, but he kept driving. The two men turned, about to attack again, but the sound of a patrol car siren was heard in the distance. They immediately sped off, leaving Adam breathing heavily. His body was shaking. He stared into the dark road, his teeth clenched tightly. "They've started to move," he muttered softly. "That means I'm getting too close to the truth." The next morning, Adam's face was pale when he arrived at the post. Liam, who saw the gash on his arm from where the window shattered, was shocked. He asked in a panicked voice, "Mate, did they try to kill you?" Adam just nodded. He patted Liam's shoulder and said in a firm tone, "Listen carefully. From now on, don't ever walk alone at night. If any strangers approach you, contact me immediately. They could be targeting anyone close to us." Liam swallowed hard, but his eyes showed courage. He replied, "Righto. I'm not backing down. I'm already in this deep." Meanwhile, new intelligence reports came in. The team found traces of large transactions between Sullivan's and Costa's accounts. The transactions occurred just days before the bodies were found in the dam. The official record stated the funds were for city infrastructure development, but the amount was too large and never appeared in the budget reports. Adam stared at the report for a long time. It was becoming clearer that the two were working together in a dark human trafficking network. It was also clearer that they wouldn't stand idly by while he dug too deep. That night, as he tried to rest in his rental, a loud crash broke the silence. The window shattered, hit by a large rock. Adam immediately ran outside, only to see the shadow of someone running away in the darkness. The rock was tied with paper. He opened the paper with trembling hands. Inside, it was written briefly, "You will never be able to touch Sullivan. Everyone in this city is in his pocket." Adam looked at the message for a long time. Anger filled his chest. He realized the message wasn't just a threat, but also a taunt. Sullivan did have great influence. Many residents still defended him, only seeing the generous side he showed. But Adam also knew the harder they tried to scare him, the closer he was to the truth. He sat at his small table, staring at the photo of his uncle, now confirmed as one of the victims. His hands trembled, his voice whispered softly. "They've tried to scare me, but I won't back down. Even my life doesn't matter, as long as this truth comes out." Outside, the rain fell heavily. The sound of thunder occasionally split the night sky. Dogs barked long and low, as if signaling that danger was now even closer. Adam closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again with even stronger determination. He knew that from that night on, his fight was no longer just an investigation. It had turned into a war against the shadow that gripped Launceston. That morning, the air in Launceston felt different. After a night full of threats, the sun emerged from behind the grey clouds. Its light pierced the wet leaves in the yard of the small post. Adam had just finished his report from the previous night, when the sound of quick footsteps was heard outside. The post door opened, and a man in a neat black leather jacket walked in, flashing a police ID. "Name's Miles Ryan, Detective Sergeant from Federal Police," he said in a firm voice. "I've been assigned to support this investigation. The information you found on Sullivan and Costa has reached Canberra." Adam looked at him for a few seconds. There was a sense of relief, but also wariness. "So, the feds are finally stepping in," he muttered. Miles nodded, his eyes sharp. "Yeah, but not everyone's on board. Some are pushing back. Probably already influenced by Costa's money. That's why our job is harder. Not just uncovering evidence, but making sure that evidence doesn't disappear on the way. Adam shook his hand firmly. He felt some of the burden lift. Although he knew the threat remained. Miles put a large bag on the table, taking out several pieces of equipment, from small cameras to sophisticated sound recorders. In a serious tone, he said, "From today, we don't move alone. They've already dared to attack directly. That means we are getting close." At that moment, Liam entered with a panicked face. He was out of breath, his t-shirt soaked in sweat. "Detective. I saw that grey truck again, but this time it was different." The driver stopped at the empty house near the paddocks and went inside for a bit. "I suspect they are hiding something there." Adam and Miles looked at each other. Without many words, the three of them immediately got ready. They headed to the empty house with cautious steps. The old building stood silently, its roof leaking, its walls covered in moss. From the outside, it looked ordinary, but as soon as the door opened, a musty smell mixed with something more pungent greeted them. The smell of anesthetic stung their noses. Inside, they found a dark room with worn-out mats. In the corner of the room were ropes, gags, and scattered bottles of sedatives. Footprints on the dirt floor were still fresh. Miles turned on a small torch. Its beam fell on a faint red stain on the floor. In a low voice, he muttered, "This place was used recently." Adam stared intently at the room. His chest felt heavy. This place was definitely used as a transit. The victims were brought here first before being moved out of the state. Liam covered his mouth with his hand. His face was pale. "So it's true. This town isn't just a dumping ground, but also their stopover." Miles immediately photographed all the evidence. "We have to move fast. If this place gets cleaned up, the trail goes cold." They left the empty house with uneasy hearts. But before they could talk further, a middle-aged woman approached them with trembling steps. Her face was full of wrinkles. Her eyes were swollen from frequent crying. In a trembling voice, she said, "Detective, sir, please, I'm begging you, find my daughter. Her name is Renee. She disappeared 2 weeks ago. People say she ran away, but I know that's not true." Adam looked at the woman gently, trying to calm her. "Did you see anything before Renee disappeared?" The woman nodded slowly. "The last night, I saw Renee being picked up by a dark car. I didn't know who was inside, but I recognized the voice that spoke. That voice. It was very similar to Mayor Sullivan's." Silence enveloped them. Liam was flabbergasted. Meanwhile, Adam felt his blood boil. Sullivan's name again. This time from the mouth of a mother who had lost her child. He gripped the woman's hand tightly, looking into her eyes gently. "It's okay. We will do everything we can." After the woman left, Miles opened his laptop at the post. He showed new data from the Central Command. "We tracked one of Coaster's logistics companies. There are shipping records with strange codes, doesn't make sense if it's just regular goods. And interestingly, every shipping code always matches the date of a missing person report around Tassie." Adam moved closer, his eyes narrowing. "So they are covering up human trafficking with fictitious records?" Miles nodded. "Exactly. And all those routes go through the warehouse near the freight station. That's their control center." Adam clenched his fist, then slammed his notebook shut. "In that case, we can't just wait. We have to make a plan to raid that warehouse. That's where the key to everything is." Liam, who had been listening, raised his head. "If you need help, sir, I'm ready. I might not be a cop, but I'm from this town. I don't want my home's name to be dragged through the mud anymore." Adam looked at Liam for a long time. He knew the young man was still young, and it was risky to involve him. But Liam's courage was genuine, born from a love for his homeland. He nodded slowly. All right. But don't ever act alone. You can be our eyes and ears. Remember, your safety is still the main priority. That night, for the first time since this case began, Adam felt he wasn't alone. Now he had Miles, a Fed who dared to go against the grain, and Liam, a local lad willing to risk his life for the truth. But he also knew the more allies he had, the higher the stakes. Coaster and Sullivan wouldn't stay silent. Their retaliation could hit anyone. Outside the post, the small bell at the neighborhood watch post chimed. It was past midnight. Adam looked at the large map on the table. Red lines connected the victims' names with dark spots in Launceston. In a soft voice, he said, "Tomorrow, we start a new step. This time, they are the ones who should be afraid, not us." The Launceston sky was overcast that night. Dark clouds covered the moonlight, making the streets around the freight station feel even more deserted. A light drizzle fell, adding to the cold air. Adam, Miles, and Liam walked slowly between the shadows of old buildings. They weren't wearing uniforms, just dark jackets to blend in with the night. The warehouse they were targeting stood solidly, its paint peeling. Its walls were covered in moss. The large iron door was rusted. From a distance, 2 trucks were visible parked beside it. A small floodlight shone towards the door, revealing several burly men on guard. Firearms were clearly visible on their hips. Liam swallowed hard. His face was pale. He whispered softly, "This is madness. It's just the 3 of us against armed mafia." Adam patted his shoulder gently. "We are not fighting, Liam. Tonight, we are just gathering evidence. Photos, recordings, take notes of everything. Tomorrow, we can force the cops who are still clean to launch a full-scale operation." Miles nodded in agreement. He took a small camera out of his jacket and turned it on carefully. "Let's begin." The 3 of them split up. Liam climbed a large tree near the fence to watch from above. Adam and Miles crept closer to the left side of the warehouse, looking for a gap between the rotting wooden planks. From there, they could peek inside. The sight inside made Adam's chest tighten. Inside the warehouse, several men sat guard, and in the corner of the room, there were dozens of young men with their hands tied and mouths gagged. Their faces were pale. Some were crying softly. Several looked very weak, almost helpless. Adam covered his mouth with his hand, trying to hold back his emotions. He had seen crime victims before, but this many made his heart ache. He muttered softly, "Oh God, this isn't a suspicion anymore, this is real." Miles immediately aimed his camera, recording every detail. He whispered, "We need to get the guards' faces, vehicle numbers, and the victims' conditions. This is gold-plated evidence." Suddenly, the sound of a truck engine started. The warehouse door creaked open. Several men began lifting the victims into the truck. They moved quickly, trained, as if they had done this many times before. Adam gritted his teeth. "They are moving the victims tonight. If we let them, the trail will go cold again." But Miles held his arm. "Calm down. If we attack now, we are outnumbered. It's better to follow from a distance." Before they could decide, a cracking sound was heard from the tree. Liam had slipped. A branch broke, his body almost falling. Although he managed to hold on, the sound was loud enough to attract the guards' attention. "Who's there?" shouted one of the men. The floodlight was aimed at the tree. Liam panicked, immediately jumping down and running. The guards fired warning shots. The sound of gunfire split the night, echoing around the warehouse. Adam and Miles had no choice. They jumped from their hiding spot, dragging Liam, who was almost caught. The situation turned chaotic. The guards shouted. The truck started to leave the warehouse. "Run!" shouted Adam, chasing after it. Miles quickly threw a set of road spikes towards the truck's tires. The front tire burst, the vehicle swerved, almost rolling over. Screams were heard from inside the warehouse. The victims panicked, trying to break free. In the panic, Adam managed to photograph the face of one of the guards clearly. But a bullet whizzed just inches from his head. "They won't be long." "Run now," shouted Miles. The three of them fled through the dark night. Breathless, their feet sinking into the mud, bullets continued to rain down from behind. Luckily, the rain made the road slippery. The guards couldn't chase them far. When they arrived at the post, their bodies were covered in mud. Liam was still shaking, but his eyes were shining. He said in a trembling voice, "I saw it clearly, sir." One of them. "He's not an outsider. He's a local bloke, Mick Sharkey's Surov. Sullivan's right-hand man. He was helping guard the warehouse." Adam was silent, his face turning pale, his heart feeling stabbed. Miles looked sharply. "So it's true. Sullivan didn't just know, he sent his own people." Adam closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again with fierce determination. "In that case, we have no way back. Tomorrow morning, all this evidence must be taken to Canberra. Sullivan and Costa can no longer hide in the shadows." But he also realized the next step would be far more dangerous. Because once they directly attacked Sullivan's interests, the retaliation would not just be threats. That retaliation could sacrifice anyone close to him. The morning in Launceston felt heavy. The sky was grey, the damp air pressing down, as if marking the burden many people were carrying. At the small post, Adam stood in front of the window, staring at the dirt road that was wet after last night's rain. He knew the evidence they had was strong, but he also knew Sullivan and Costa wouldn't stay silent. That afternoon, several residents began to arrive at the post. Their faces were full of anxiety. Some had lost children, some had lost relatives. They came not just to ask questions, but also to declare their readiness. Adam looked at them one by one. He knew fear was still there, but anger had begun to replace it. That night, a loud bang was heard from the direction of the community hall. A large bonfire lit up, illuminating a crowd of armed men. In the middle of them stood Mick Sharkey's Surov, Sullivan's right-hand man. His voice was loud and challenging. "Burke? Ryan? Come on out. If you're brave enough to fight Sullivan, we'll finish you tonight, right in front of the residents." The atmosphere was tense. Some residents hid behind their houses, afraid of the weapons they saw. But others began to gather on Adam's side. They carried star pickets, pieces of wood, and torches. Small cheers were heard. A sign that courage was beginning to grow. Adam stepped forward. His voice was firm, even though his heart was pounding. "Surov, that's enough. We have proof of all your crimes. That dam, that warehouse, the innocent victims. You can't cover it up anymore. Tonight, you're not fighting just me. You're fighting the whole community." The residents cheered, giving him courage. Surov laughed sinisterly. "Proof," he said mockingly. "You think that proof can save you? Before it even reaches Canberra, your head will be buried in this ground." Suddenly, several of Surov's men advanced, pointing their weapons. The residents briefly retreated, but Adam raised his hand, signaling for them to hold their ground. Miles whispered softly, If gunfire breaks out, protect the residents as much as possible. I'll draw their attention. Adam nodded firmly. The clash erupted. Rocks flew, wood slammed, and the sound of gunshots split the night. Flames from the torches fell onto dry grass, the blaze growing larger. The suburb instantly turned into a war zone. Adam faced Surov directly. They fought fiercely. Surov swung a long iron bar, while Adam parried with a sturdy piece of wood he found on the ground. Every blow nearly hit its mark, every attack could be fatal. Liam, though still young, ran to help the injured residents. He dragged an old man to safety, then returned to the thick of the chaos. His voice was loud. "Don't be afraid. There are more of us. They are just a handful." That shout ignited the spirits of the other residents. Miles fired a shot into the air, giving a loud warning. "Anyone who still wants to live, stop right now." Some of Surov's men retreated in fear. But Surov kept fighting, his eyes full of hatred. With burning anger, Adam finally managed to hit Surov's arm. The iron bar he was holding fell. Residents immediately rushed forward, tying Surov's hands with rope. A small cheer of victory was heard, but the atmosphere remained tense. Because in the distance, the sound of cars was heard approaching. Sharp headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road. Miles let out a heavy sigh. "Coaster. They've sent reinforcements." The residents began to panic. Some wanted to run, but Adam stood tall in front of them. "Don't retreat," he said loudly. "This is our town. If we back down now, they will rule this place forever." A woman lit a torch high. "We are not running anymore." Her voice trembled but was full of determination. "They took our children. They killed our husbands. Tonight, we fight back." The residents' cheers grew louder, merging with the roar of the growing fire. The cars stopped. A dozen armed men got out, their faces cold. They were ready to attack at any moment. Adam felt the cold sweat on his temples, but also a strengthening resolve. In a loud voice, he said, "If it's a war you want, tonight we are ready. And let God decide who is right." The black cars carrying Vinnie Coaster's men stopped right in front of the community hall. Floodlights cut through the darkness, making the residents' faces pale with fear. From the cars stepped a dozen fully armed men. Among them was a figure in a neat suit, with a paunchy stomach, and a face full of arrogance. Vinnie Coaster. He smiled sinisterly, clapping his hands as if watching a show. "Pretty impressive, you lot. Daring to make this much noise. But you forgot one thing. I have money. And in this country, money can buy everything. Including your lives." Adam stepped forward. His face was firm, though his chest was pounding. "Money can't always cover up the blood you've spilled. We have the evidence. Your warehouse, your trucks, your men. It's all on tape." Coaster laughed loudly. "Evidence," he said dismissively. "If I want, that evidence can disappear in an instant. Sullivan is on my side too. The mayor of this city isn't a puppet, he's a partner." When Sullivan's name was mentioned, the residents began to murmur. They turned towards Hugh Sullivan, who suddenly appeared from behind the crowd with a calm face. He pretended to be surprised, trying to play his role. "Don't believe their words. I am your mayor. I've always helped you at harvest time, at community events, when you needed funding. This detective just wants to destroy our town." The atmosphere was silent for a moment. But suddenly, a woman's soft voice broke through from the residents' ranks. It was Mrs. Ratner. Her face was full of tears. "In that case, Why did my daughter disappear after she was last seen with your men, Mr. Sullivan? Why, every time we asked, did you just tell us to be quiet? Other residents joined in. One by one, accusations flew. All the stories that were once just whispers now erupted into loud shouts. Sullivan began to lose his composure. His face was pale, his eyes darted around, looking for a way to escape. At that tense moment, Miles held his phone up high. He played the recording from the warehouse they had obtained. Surov's voice was heard clearly. Sullivan has given the order. The victims are to be moved tonight. Costa doesn't want to wait. That recording shattered everything. The residents fell silent, then a roar of anger erupted. Sullivan took a few steps back, his face terrified. Adam stepped forward, looking him straight in the eye. It's all clear. You're not a protector. You're the mastermind of all this suffering. That dam, that warehouse, the innocent victims. It's all you're doing. Sullivan tried to run, but the residents surrounded him. Costa growled in anger, signaling his men to attack. The first gunshot rang out. Chaos erupted again. Residents screamed, some seeking cover, some fighting back with torches and pickets. Adam and Miles took cover behind a wall, returning fire towards Costa's men. Liam, despite his fear, helped pull injured residents to safety. The fire grew larger, illuminating the tense faces that night. In the midst of the chaos, sirens were suddenly heard in the distance. Blue and red lights cut through the dark night. Dozens of heavily armed police officers arrived in tactical vehicles. Special forces immediately surrounded the area. A megaphone voice boomed, "All armed individuals, lay down your weapons now." Seeing the tables turned, some of Costa's men panicked and surrendered. Others tried to run, but were quickly caught. Costa tried to get into his car to escape. But Adam was faster. He blocked him, pointing his pistol. "Your journey ends here." Costa snorted, still trying to be arrogant. "You think you've won? My money can get me out of prison anytime." Adam looked at him coldly. "Not this time. Because besides the evidence of your crimes, I also know who the most precious victim is to me." He held up his uncle's photo high. "He was one of them. And I will make sure you pay in full." The federal police immediately handcuffed Costa. Sullivan was also dragged by the residents into the middle of the field. His face was battered, his mouth still shouting his defense. But no one believed him anymore. Dawn approached. Launceston, which was full of fire last night, now only had thin smoke and the remnants of chaos. But for the first time, there was hope. The residents stood together, watching as Sullivan and Costa were led into the prison vans. A cheer of victory erupted. Not because the war was over, but because courage had finally defeated fear. Liam looked at Adam with shining eyes. "Mate, we did it. The town is free." Adam patted his shoulder gently. "This isn't just our success, Liam. This is a victory for the residents who dared to fight back." Miles shook Adam's hand firmly. "You didn't just solve a case, Adam. You saved a future." Adam looked at the sky, which was beginning to lighten. He still gripped his uncle's photo. A tear rolled down slowly, but this time, it wasn't from grief. "Uncle Kev," he thought. "Your struggle wasn't in vain. I found the truth." That day, behind the remaining smoke and rubble, a new belief was born, that sincerity can defeat a mask, courage can overcome fear, and the truth, no matter how long it's buried, will eventually rise. Adam looked at the residents standing tall and said in a steady voice, "Don't let fear rule you again. Make the courage of tonight a legacy for our children and grandchildren." The residents fell silent, then nodded in unison.